Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Hello, everybody. On behalf of the entire Speak Up and MobieTrain team, a warm welcome to our second joint webinar, revealing 4 proven tips to reach, train, and engage with your frontline employees. My name is Sylvie Ingels. I'm the Partnership Director at MobieTrain, and I will guide you through this session and introduce you to our speakers. First, let me share with you our agenda. After this introduction, our speakers will set the scene for you and elaborate on why engagement is important. Then they will dive into 4 tips on how to drive this engagement within your own organization. And we will end this webinar with a recap and a Q&A session. There is a live chat for you at the bottom right to post your questions at any time. Please do share them with us and they will be answered all at the end in the Q&A. So now it's time for me to proudly introduce you to our speakers. It's Guy van Eck, CEO and founder of MobieTrain, and Erwin van der Vlist, CEO and co-founder of Speap. Handing over to Erwin.
Thank you, Sylvie. It's nice to meet you all. My name is Erwin van der Vlist. I'm one of the 2 founders of the company called Speap. And maybe it's nice to share where this all started. So about 10, 11 years ago, both Patrick, the other founder, and myself were still studying at the university in Amsterdam, but we also had a part-time job in retail. And in that part-time job in retail, we, as frontline workers, experienced firsthand how difficult it is to communicate with your colleagues, with your manager, but also to get important information from the head office, for example. So what did we do? We had a lot of paper on bulletin boards. We had TV screens in the break rooms. We even had like a phone list with phone numbers so that whenever people called in sick in the morning, you had to call 20, 30 people to find replacements. And of course, you can imagine that was very time consuming and also very difficult to get everybody aligned and have everybody understand what they should do for work, but also when they have to show up, etc. So both Patrick and myself decided to create technology to make this challenge easier. So how do we connect and engage with frontline workers that are never behind the desk? They don't have a company phone, they don't have a company email address, therefore a very difficult to reach and engage workforce. And this is presently still a big challenge. And we are trying to solve that with many, many customers we already did. You see a couple brands in the bottom of the slide. So I had the pleasure to work with great companies like IKEA, Siemens, Nike, Bosch, and many, many more, and help them on this digital journey and connect and engage their frontline workers. So very excited to tell you a bit more about that today. Handing it over to Guy.
Thanks a lot, Erwin. So my name is Guy, and I'm the founder CEO of MobieTrain. We are with, let's say, 3. We have 2 co-founders, Mireille and Willy. A little bit the same story, although from a different angle. But I was working for more than 8 years in mystery shopping and audit services, which is an industry where, you work together with a lot of retailers around the globe to help and drive their customer service and experience. And by doing that research, we often saw that people that are in the front line, just as Erwin was also explaining, were struggling a lot with getting the right knowledge at the right time in order to be well informed in front of clients and have a good customer experience. And it's because of those results that I started looking into why is this? And then one of the things that we saw is that training for frontline employees was often a little bit neglected. There was training, but often via traditional methods, which means that from a budget point and a time point of view, there was not a lot of time and also not that much training. And that's where we said, as from 2015, let's build a platform where we can do this in a more scalable way, where we can reach the people in a fun and engaging way to get them the right knowledge at the right time. And so far, we've done that with some great successes. Just as Erwin mentioned, we still have a little bit less clients. We're a little bit younger as a company, but we're getting there. But we have some AAA brands where we're really proud of, as you can see on the slide. But also in the mid-market, we see a lot of companies that embracing microlearning, embracing new ways of learning for their frontline teams. Sylvie? You're on mute.
Thanks for the introductions. Let's move on to the part, why is engagement important?
Yeah, maybe I will kick off. Yeah, I think if you see the numbers on the slide, it speaks for itself. Often companies are asking like, yeah, can you measure this or can you measure a return on that? Now, this is about engagement, but in general, what you see is that employees that are well informed, and Erwin will know much more about that, but are well informed also about the strategy and how the company is going, that have the right knowledge and feel that they matter. Often I see companies saying, frontliners, but they don't need a lot of training because basically they come to have a paycheck and then they walk away. And I always think like, yeah, these are also people and they also have needs. They also want to understand why they do that. The needs will be completely different, and we will zoom into that later on with other employees in companies. But I think having them engaged, having them well informed, the right knowledge to help them in their job, it's logical that it will drive a better engagement. And as a consequence, you see the results here. And Erwin, I'm sure you want to add a few things to that.
Yeah, absolutely. So often what we also see is sometimes we get asked like, what is the ROI on better communication and better alignment internally? And that is very difficult to prove, even maybe even impossible to prove, because it's dependent on different factors. So certain things that we do see is that like employee happiness, like impacts retention, but I'd say more so companies decide to digitize this because they value their frontline workers as a very important part of their business. And in some organizations, the frontline workers are also consumer facing, so they help your customers. And in order to help your customers in the best way possible, it's of course important to have that knowledge level, but also engagement at the highest maximum. In other types of businesses, maybe the frontline workers are not customer facing because they work in a manufacturing floor or on construction sites. But still, they perform duties and work for the business, and that is where the real money is generated. So, better to include those important workers, make them more knowledgeable, and also share more and more information with them because they are looking for it. We see often in employee surveys that, especially with frontline workers, people that are disconnected, don't have company accounts, do want to be informed better, do want to get that video message from a CEO or from a management team. So those are definitely items to take into consideration to also make your internal business cases why engagement is important and why it is important to invest in that.
Yeah, and maybe one more thing to add is also in the war for talent, because we see nowadays in a lot of industries it's very difficult to find good employees. So yeah, two things: you can look for the perfect employee, which will be sometimes impossible to find, or you find for motivated, passionate people that uh, are engaged, that want to learn, that want to get the right information to perform in their job, and you train them, you inform them well. And what we see with some companies is the fact that, as Erwin was saying, that you give a message to the people that they matter for you, that you want to inform with them, that you want to reach them, that you do that with also new technology, also for them. So not only the people on a managerial level or in an HQ, but also the people that do the work on the ground, that they also get this kind of tools. That does a lot also in the recruitment process, that people see, okay, this is a company where there is a different kind of culture. But there we come back to that later also, how important culture is.
Okay, so thank you for really like elaborating on why engagement is important, he and Erwin. Can you now share with the audience like for the four tips or the four tactics based on your experience and your insights on how really our customers and prospects can drive this engagement in their own organizations?
Yeah,
Shall we
absolutely.
start with the first one, really like the go mobile first? How reach everybody in your team, in your company?
Yeah, absolutely. I can take this one first. Um, So if like how to reach everyone, how to reach frontline workers, like if we take one step back, maybe it's also questioning yourself why is this needed, why should you do this. And typically when I'm connecting with customers and other companies in the industry, um, this is this is based on let's say an evolution of communication, right? If we take communication and reaching everyone holistically, we did that many years ago by verbal, and that became paper. Paper became fax machines and phone calls. Later it became email, but then it stopped. Now, of course, there are more and more tools coming out there that have some form of like messaging, uh, uh, tools like Microsoft Teams, for example, Slack, etc. But those are really focused on the desk workers, not on the frontline workers. The frontline workers are not connected. They still heavily rely on that paper and verbal communication. So basically, decades ago, when you look at the evolution of communication. So why is it important to reach everyone? Is because our external world have changed, and we should also adapt our internal world inside the business accordingly as well. So that's what I would say. Why should you do it? Then, of course, is the question, but how do you do it? Typically, what we see that works very well is to make this part of a bigger digital transformation. Don't just implement a certain technology for frontline workers, but make it much bigger. As a digital transformation, we as a company by 2025 want to automate and digitize certain things, certain parts of the business. You give it a proper name, and then introducing a tool just for the frontline workers is one of the pillars underneath that digital transformation umbrella. We see that that makes most sense, and it's also the best to get those frontline workers to adapt and adopt a tool when you roll it out. So then we move into the what, and like what should that tool be? We often see like make that as recognizable as possible. So if we look at where do we communicate in our private lives, how do we communicate with our friends and families and dear ones? We typically do that on tools like WhatsApp, Facebook, LinkedIn, Twitter, maybe Instagram, TikTok, whatever you use. So those type of tools are the norm in our private lives. We should implement that same norm also internally for the business, and also therefore for the frontline workers. So go mobile first, obviously, is a very important decision to make. So don't focus just on the desk side of things, but the mobile experience needs to be outstanding and needs to be super easy to use, super intuitive. Um, if you roll out certain technologies, it also needs to come with clear policies. How are we going to use this? What are we going to use this for? What are we not going to use this for? Very important. Are we going to use this during shifts? Well, in manufacturing and construction, maybe not the best idea because of safety concerns. In retail, hospitality, casinos, etc., maybe not the best for customer experience. So create clear rules and policies when you digitize so that everybody knows what's expected from them, including your managers. And that middle management, they are extremely important to implement technologies like this and to really drive your digital transformation plan all the way to the last in the chain, your frontline workers. Um, that's also one of the things that we started this partnership between Speakup and MobieTrain for is like, how can we bring consumer grade social media experience that has a rich set of features based on communications and on learning. So want to hand it over to you, Guy. You probably also want to add here. So
Yeah, sure. I think many things were said, and I fully agree with what you said, Erwin. One important thing I see for frontliners is flexibility. And so those people, they, and if it's now in learning or in communication, they're all very busy. They often have more and more work and less time. That gives a sort of tension field. So the fact that you can provide employees in the front line with flexibility to do it maybe on their own phone, and I come back to that, which has to do with procedures, maybe to do it on another device, but that it works. That's, I think, a super important thing. And to come back to that last one, what we often saw is that if people think about mobile, then they say, yeah, can we then let people use their own mobile phone? And yeah, in some companies, they say we give everybody a mobile phone. By the way, there are also some great studies on that it is a very wise investment for frontliners to do it. Because if you see the number of tooling that is coming in order to make their lives more efficient, effective, and better, then I think it is a wise investment. But even if you don't do that, then yes, you can let them use their own device, as long as you give, I think, the freedom of choice. So that you say to employees, look, you want to use your own device? Perfectly, you can. You will have the communication, the knowledge at your fingertips whenever you want. If you don't want to do that because of whatever reason, then we will foresee, sometimes is it a few tablets, we have still a kiosk where people can do it on a desktop, because the technology that we offer, it works on every device. But it is mobile first, to give the opportunity to those that want to do it, also on their own phones, to do it. And a funny thing is that often you see that a lot of employees want to do it, because sometimes that's also a question. Yeah, do they really want to do that on their own phone? But in most environments now, you will have a Wi-Fi connection, or yeah, data is becoming very, very cheap. So basically, there are not a lot of hurdles, as long as they see that it also is relevant to them. And we come back to that later on, both on the communication that it gets, it helps them, the same thing with the learnings. But if that's the case, then we don't see a lot of people that are really against it. On the contrary, many people welcome it and want to embrace it in their daily work. And then maybe with the procedures, I think we come back to it later with also how to make a learning culture, and the same thing will be for communication. But maybe one thing there is that it really depends on the organization and the type of work you do. We don't believe you need to implement this kind of tooling to say, oh, but then everybody after working hours will get this, so we don't need to lose any time during working hours. I think that's the wrong perception. It's more, you want to make a culture where you say frontliners matter to us. We want to inform them. We want to train them in a really good way, and we're going to make time for it. But with the big advantage that there is a lot of flexibility. So they don't need to take hours out of the workspace to do this. Now, sometimes 5 minutes is enough to go to the back of the house, do something in a manufacturing environment, go to a safe place, do the learning, come back, or get the information. So this is, I think, a very important thing to embed that learning culture, but more will come later on that.
Yes.
Maybe good to go to the next topic then, which I will take. And this is a little bit train with the right content. And it's an important thing, because in the past, I make often the analogy with marketing. You had the typically marketing on billboards, everybody that was walking in the street, or the big commercials on television. For everybody, it was the same thing. But often this is, missing the goal. And that's how we've seen the evolution to digital marketing right now. Basically, you see the same thing that's happening in learning. It went from big classroom sessions where everybody is seen as the same person with the same needs, and they're going to get the same content. But for many people there, it will not be that relevant. So basically, how can you bring the right content to the right people in order to help them in their job? And that's where often technology will support. It's definitely not the only thing, because we believe also very much in face-to-face moments, in real trainings, to bond with each other, to train soft skills, etc. But in many cases, if you make an analysis, technology can support you in order to bring in a much more flexible way that right content to the right people. Now, a few things that are important with that content for frontliners is we spoke about mobile first. The fact that you go mobile first is also pushing you to think about content that is concise. Because if you're going to make learnings that are very long, like the traditional ones in e-learning that take half an hour to go through one session, it will not fit. People will not do that on their mobile phone, and they will not engage with it. So it is a very good thing, and we saw that with clients. Even if some people will still do it on a desktop, it doesn't matter. But the fact that you're gonna think about shaping content in a very concise way that's good to consume on a mobile phone will help you already to drive engagement with your people afterwards. So that's an important thing, and that comes always down also in the technology to simplicity. Keep it simple, as Erwin was also mentioning earlier. A second point is microlearning. Microlearning that helps a lot on that flexibility that I was saying earlier on. Because microlearning doesn't mean that you cannot have a course of half an hour or an hour. The only difference is that we're going to structure it, that one course, in multiple microlearnings. From each depends, 5 minutes, 10 minutes. It can even be 15 minutes, because this is not a scientific rule that a microlearning can only be 3 minutes long. That's also a misconception. But you build it in certain blocks, and that gives a lot of flexibility. If a learner and a person wants to do it in one go, and they have the time and the manager is fine with it, they can. But often they don't have it, and at least they can go out of the workspace, use those 5 to 10 minutes, come back and progress with the work. So important there is, don't think about microlearning as just thousands of short videos that you put somewhere and people need to search it. No, we try to bring structure in it to make it relevant to the people, and use also a lot of different formats. So video is really nice, and we use it a lot. By the way, also videos from your own employees, because there is a tremendous amount of knowledge with your own employees. So use that. It's a super cheap way of making content, but a very powerful one. But don't keep it only to that. It's nice that people see variation, that sometimes it's more text with PDF file, text with maybe some GIF files and some questions to make sure that people interact with the content in order that it really, really sticks. And then the last point, which I already mentioned a little bit earlier, the right content for the right people. So that's where technology comes in play, because if you make it on a platform, you can easily work with specific user groups, and you can say, for that specific group of people, we're going to show this kind of content. But also you will have a lot of agility to make something for a specific group at a specific time. So for example, in the business, you see that there is a need for a certain topic. Basically in 2 days, 3 days, you can make the necessary micro learnings, and you can launch it by the end of the week to thousands of people where it's relevant for. Thousands, or maybe just 10, depending on what's the need and who needs to get it. But one thing that we see that is not working is trying to overwhelm people. Say, now we have a fantastic library of courses, we have a fantastic overall view here, and we're going to push it directly to everyone. People feel overwhelmed. It's too much, and they are afraid to start with it. So most of the time, we also work in a more way where every month we launch a few courses, so that step by step they feel the content, they see it's relevant, and that's how they engage more and more with it, and that's how a habit is made. So that's a little bit, a few things that we see. Keep it simple. Make sure you use different formats to also drive that curiosity, and don't overwhelm people, but build it step by step in a sort of campaign-based way of learning.
Yeah, a few things that we see here at Speak is that, how do you do this, right? Like, how can you make sure that it is the right content for the right audience? And it can be very complicated. If you have an organization with hundreds, if not thousands of locations and different departments and job roles, etc., we often suggest look at what you already have in place. Potentially you have an HR system or a payroll system or an Active Directory or a combination of those, where you have employee information already stored. So utilizing those systems is a great way to make this practical, but also make this easy manageable for the longer term. Because what you don't want to do is, of course, manually maintain all of this. And especially if you have thousands or tens of thousands of employees, try to automate as much as possible. And there are definitely ways to do that in a very simple way. And next to that, also, what is the right content? Try to also launch some surveys. Ask your frontline workers, what do they care about? What do they want? And use that as input for your own strategy. And then as you go, you can improve yourselves. Because this is not like an overnight thing to do. This is as I mentioned before, a digital transformation that takes time, that takes persistence. But if you believe in the end goal, by 2025, we want to have this, then you have something that you can work towards.
Zooming in now on the third tactic, keeping everyone engaged, keeping them all with you. Erwin, could you further elaborate?
Yeah, definitely. It's this is a very interesting statement.
Mhm.
I have many thoughts about this and observations in the market. Okay, if you look at it in the opposite way, like what would it mean if people are disengaged, right? Disengaged workers don't come with they don't bring the energy at work, and they also affect people around them. And even more so if your frontline workers are, to my point earlier, consumer facing, they might even bring that not great experience to the customers as well. So it's very important to keep everybody engaged, but how do you do that? Well, that's not by just simply um, looking at what you currently have, and like, for example, you have a big piece of content, to Guy's point earlier, and you try to push that through a mobile device. You really have to think about, what is my content strategy, what's my learning strategy on the longer term, and how can we make that fit for purpose for those frontline workers that see it on a 5-inch screen and not on a desktop. So with those content strategies, what we've seen work very well is if you try to find certain ambassadors in the business. And that does not necessarily only people from the office. I'd say more so, it would be interesting if you can pick people from the front line as well, frontline supervisors, managers, or even like frontline employees that want to take a certain role and make that visible in a digital platform that you launch. Because what we see with those type of pieces of content, it makes it much more personal. And when it is more personal, people engage with that content much more. We see proof that likes and interactions and comments on very personal content that is posted by local managers or your direct colleagues are much higher than if internal comms post something from the head office, because it's quite far away. But on that same note, we've seen that, like, if you make your management team um, and especially, I'd say, your CEO willing to participate in something like this and post vlogs or blogs and make it much more visual to all the employees in your organization, also resonates very well. So think about a content plan, just like you schedule something for your external Facebook and LinkedIn and Twitter campaigns. You should do something similar for your internal audiences as well. Because what you want to do is have appealing content that is coming from different types of sources, different types of employee levels, different types of departments, so that it becomes very appealing. And of course, every time should think about, how is this going to be read on a 5-inch screen by a frontline worker that logs in 20 or 30 seconds when they do. They will not spend hours or like multiple minutes on a platform when they log in. They do that like very quick, very bite size. Very similar to how you use WhatsApp, very similar how you use Facebook. Probably everyone here, you don't log in into Facebook and you scroll for tens of minutes through timelines, etc. It's very quick. So think about that when you launch technology to engage your workers in the same capacity. Now, we spoke a little bit about rules. We do suggest to have some form of social media rules in place, like how you should post on Facebook externally. You can also apply internally. Things like um, avoid, of course, discrimination, avoid certain how do you say that? That you make jokes in text and that can be perceived in the wrong way. So really try to educate your internal audiences that, like, if you launch something like this, and of course with proper permissions, that they also understand the rules with it, but also make it fun. Videos work very well, images work very well, text works well, but not too long. Make it interactive by asking questions, launching a poll or a quick survey, and collect that feedback bottom up is super, super helpful to set your internal strategies and to internally improve further and further as you go. Because as I mentioned before, it's not like a one day or overnight thing to do. This takes time. And it takes time to really get your culture and your employee engagement to where you want it to be. Last but not least, there are quite a lot of unofficial channels, what we see in place. Uh, WhatsApp groups amongst local managers and their teams, or local Facebook groups. Um, Try to understand what the needs are. Why do people use those type of unofficial channels? And try to give that a place in your official channel if you launch that. Again, to Guy's point, make it interesting, make it voluntary. Don't push it like you have to do this. People should want to do this and should want to be part of it.
Yeah. I think from my seat, three main points, and there are many more. But the relevant content, we spoke about it already. But if you start with a learning program that's more digital, like we do, and the first courses are only courses because it's mandatory, people need to do it, and that's it. Or you start with suddenly 50 courses to overwhelm them, yeah, that's killing it. It's very difficult for people at that time to really feel like, oh, this is for us, because that's what we said in the beginning. You want to make statements that you do this for the frontliners. You want to help them in their job. You want to even help them maybe in their life, and that's how you want to bring it, and that should also be the purpose of doing it. So then is relevant content very important, and that can be very different also for different stakeholders within your organization. If you have an organization where you have let's say 3,000 employees, 500 of them are on an HQ, the rest is more in a frontline. It will be different things that are relevant. It will be different topics, even on a smaller level. Maybe for certain groups of 100 people, there can be something super, super relevant and important. Then you should, yeah, look in it. As Erwin already said, that goes together, of course, with making a strategy, that you say, how are we going to roll this out, also from a learning point of view. But the most important thing is make the content relevant. And that doesn't need to be always complicated. This doesn't need to be always big topics, but really things where you know from speaking with frontliners, this is something they care about. The second piece is the fun, and make it more fun to do it. It's not because it is in a digital way that you cannot give it a twist. And that doesn't mean it needs to be always a game or something very fancy. It can. Again, we're not against that. In some cases, virtual reality can be fantastic. Certain games that you can make in order to bring a sort of awareness around a new strategy can be fantastic. But even though, or just using some text, but in a very nice way written, in a more fun way written, in line with how the frontliners are looking at it, with some nice GIF files, etc., can be already something fantastic. So it doesn't need to be always very big, but just make also the tone of voice in a more fun way, in line, of course, with your culture and the people that you're addressing. If we speak about gamification, because we add that also into our tool, it's also not specifically thinking about badges and points. Yes, we have that, and you can do great things with it, depending on how you look at it and what kind of incentives you couple to it. But for us, one of the most important things is just the visual aspect, that people see progression. So the fact that they see that they can do X amount of assignments, courses, whatever you name it, that they feel this is possible for them to do. Because if you have, as I mentioned earlier, in one go 100, then they say that that's not going to work. But if they see only 3, and when they start it, you make it very visual, that they can see progress, that they can see, here I start, there I can end. That's what we see helps them a lot to keep moving, to go through it, and to say, okay, I want to reach that end point. And then next to it, work around curiosity, work with surprise elements, that people suddenly say like, oh, wow, I didn't know about that, or, oh, this is something new, just like you see it sometimes in games, but it definitely also works in a learning environment. And then the last point, Erwin already touched upon it, but is a culture. I mean, you can have whatever tool you want, But if your culture and yeah, you're not into it with the company, it will not work. And it can be fantastic content, it can be a fantastic tool, but it will not land. That doesn't mean that, because sometimes that's the case, that if the higher management is not showing that lots of interest, that you cannot do it with leadership at maybe a divisional level. I mean, it doesn't always need to come directly top down. It can also go bottom up, but you need to have leadership, people that say, look, for my division, for my group of people, we're going to make time for learning. This is going to be an important thing. And the same thing for communication. And that also means you really give people time to do it. We spoke about a retail environment where, of course, you are not going to start learning on a smartphone when people are in front of you as a customer. It's not really a good practice. But if you have a store manager who says like, okay, we currently don't have a lot of clients in store, you can go to the back of the house, use 5 to 10 minutes to do a few elements, and you come back. This is perfectly possible. But then you also need to make it part of your KPIs, make it part of your management talks. And that's what we see with a lot of companies. They say, these are our operational KPIs. That's what we're talking about every week, every month, super important. But why we don't make from learning and other things also a KPI? And let's talk about it. And let's see how we move along and why we don't achieve certain targets there and what can we do about it. So making it really part of your culture, implementing a learning culture is as important as all the rest we said, but it also needs time. I mean, if you don't have it now, then I would not say you need to wait till it will come. No, it needs to grow. You need to give it time, but you need to have a clear commitment to go into that direction and to take actions to bring it alive. So yeah, that for me are some of the most important things to get people engaged, and more importantly to keep them engaged.
Let's move then to the fourth step, like training and optimizing the ecosystem of tools and blended approach. Could you take that one?
Yeah, will be a few elements here. And one element is the slide you see here on the screen, which goes a little bit more on how the learning space evolved. And I will bring it back later on to a more general thinking. But what you see is that in the 2000s, it was all about, oh, we should do some digital learning. Let's have an LMS with some typical e-learnings. And the LMS is the central piece. And everybody, a bit like the story I gave from marketing in the past, needs to go via this one platform, needs to see the same content, and that's it. If you go to 2018, you see that instead of putting management central and how you manage digital courses, they put more the learner central. And they say like, okay, let's look at that person and what does that person need and how can we bring the right content to that specific person. And that's where you see new technologies come in play, that you want to give way more flexibility to people, that you really do it as a sort of design thinking to shape your environment, and that the LMS or the bigger tools behind, and it depends from company to company if you need that or not, but that it's a little bit more on the background. The most important thing is making sure that that learner gets the right content in a very simple, easy way to consume it. And then we get to 2020 as close as possible to the moment they really need it, because that's where you really can drive behavioral change. If people see certain content pieces that directly has an impact in their daily job, which they see, they learn, and then they can apply, that's the best thing. It's not always possible. It's also not always easy to do that. But with a lot of topics, it's with technology something you can do. And of course, you need constant also coaching on the job. It's not all digital, because that's another thing sometimes that I see, that people then think we're going to go digital. Now we need to do everything digitally. No. Often you have a lot of people together. Is it in a store or is it in a manufacturing environment? Yeah, it's not because you do certain digital pieces that you cannot say, hey, let's come together. Let's also do a session around it. Let's do some role plays around it. That's perfectly possible. So coaching on the job, bonding with each other is also a very important thing. But we see an evolution in how people think about learning. That brings me to the point of ecosystems. So we don't pretend or say that microlearning, our tool or whatever tool, is the only solution that solves everything. No, we believe that depending on your company, depending on the people that work in your company and the needs, you might need to shape an ecosystem with different toolings. Very important is that those toolings can speak with each other so that they can integrate in an easy way, and that they can work with each other in order to give the best experience. That can be in learning. To give you one example, you could have our environment, but you say like, look, for soft skills, I would love to have this provider of trainings. Can't we implement those courses into your tool? Why not? Of course, it's possible. As I said earlier, you want to do a specific game and make a game, even VR. Yeah, you want to also embed it, also possible. So you can make an ecosystem where you say different learning technologies, tools, solutions can come together if they can speak with each other and give for that specific user the best experience. That's within the learning environment, but also within HR tech, and even also outside of HR tech, but think about performance technology, etc. We believe that there's also an ecosystem. And that's the reason why we're here together, because communication, that's a specialty of Erwin and the team. For us, that's learning. And we believe that, we are really good in what we do, you're really good in what you do, but those two can come together. And it's up to a company to see like how you want to shape your tech stack, how you want to bring tools together, specifically in line with the needs of your people. And that's why we say the only thing that's now super relevant to look at, or it's not the only thing, but a very important thing is, if you're going to invest in new technology, make sure that it's open for integrations, that it's an open system, that you can link with other tools, because maybe you don't know it now, but maybe 1 year from now you want to do it. And if you're then stuck, then it would be a real pity that you did that investment.
Yeah, and from our side, what I can add to that, Guy, is that when we look at the usage data of the platform, so of course technology comes with a lot of analytic capabilities, but what we see is when you create an employee hub, so indeed to your point, multiple tools, but they seamlessly connect with one another. We see that the frontline workers also engage much more with those tools as a whole. And for the experience, also much better. Like if I click on my benefits and I have to log in again, or if I click on my schedule and I have to go to a different app, that's not ideal. So indeed, thinking of an open system where it all comes together as a form of an employee hub is definitely what we see that works well for the experience. But also when we look at the usage data on the back end of our end users. So talking about data, I would also definitely suggest like looking into how can you use that data to constantly improve, right? Like instead of asking an employee survey once per year and base that as input for your strategy the year after, with these type of technologies, you can even track behavior. How engaged are my frontline workers truly with my content, with my learning? And use that as input on a much more frequent basis than once per year or once per quarter, for example. You can do it almost real time.
Thank you, Guy and Erwin. That brings us to the end of the 4 tips, the 4 tactics. Thank you for taking us on this ride. Based on both your experience and insights, we discovered a lot of interesting things we can use to drive employee engagement. I will summarize it for you in 4 valuable tips. The first one being create a bigger digital transformation plan. Make it a part of your overall strategy. The second tip is understand your audience. What are their specific needs? What are they looking for, really? The third tactic is get everybody in, get everybody involved, and get everybody on the train. And the last tactic brings us to our partnerships is really, first of all, understand the cycle of measuring and optimizing, as a data-driven approach is key to a success, but also go for that blended approach and make use of the integration and like the integration and the partnership of Speakup and MobieTrain. So cool stuff I heard the last 30 minutes. Now reaching the final part of our webinar, the Q&A session. I saw in the chat that there were some questions popping up, so let's zoom into this one. if that's okay for you, Erwin and Guy. So, reading it for you, do you have examples of how to drive engagement from increasing intrinsic motivation versus extrinsic motivation, such as the KPIs we mentioned in the session? Which is more efficient? What is the most successful if you had to pick one?
Mm. I would say it's always a combination, but the way how we built our platform with experts on behavioral science gamification was all about
Mhm.
intrinsic motivation. Very, very different from what we see often in more United States, where it's really about extrinsic. So one thing is sometimes it's also cultural because in certain countries, if you go way too much in extrinsic with a lot of KPIs and leaderboards, people will not like it and they will disengage. In some other countries, it might be good to do it because there they really love it to see that sort of competition and to have it. So it will depend a little bit on cultural differences. It will depend on your company and what the culture is in your company. And what we see is that, yeah, we made a solution where we start from the intrinsic motivation, where we believe that
Mhm.
that's the very important thing. As I mentioned earlier, make things very visual so that people see progression, which is nudging them to go to the end, has nothing to do with points or with anything, just the fact of seeing that is helping them. We see that that works great, but have also the possibility that in certain cultures where you need to go more extrinsic, that you can do it. And that's in our case, for example, that we have a point system, that we have XP points where you can make competitions with, etc., etc. So I don't think there is one answer that fits everyone.
Mhm.
It really depends a little bit on the elements that I mentioned.
Okay, next question. Do you have tips on how to introduce such tools in a company and get everyone on board, especially since people often don't like to change? They do not like change, typical like behavior. Erwin, I see
Yeah.
you.
Yeah, absolutely. So, um, of course, everything that we spoke about today, right, can be seen as input, and how do you drive this change? Um, to make it practical, with a couple of examples, we've seen customers organize food trucks that go like by regions, and you can show, okay, did you install both the apps? Then you can get a free taco. Can be a super super practical example. But don't forget what we spoke about earlier, like those middle managers. You have to like involve them in driving this change. Now that means, like, by understanding what do they need. What do these managers need? Well, they're apparently using potentially WhatsApp groups. That is a need they have. Why not provide them something that gives them the same ability, but in a more secure and professional environment? So it's by understanding your audiences, by enabling your managers, getting them on board by true management drive to believe in this. And then in the end, you can also a little bit bribe them with those food truck examples.
Here's some ideas from you.
It's again should be in sync with the culture. We had also events where people were brought together in a very fun and engaging way, and from there you kick it off. For example, if I think about the retail environment, as Erwin was saying earlier, it's super important to have the managerial levels, mid-level also with you. So if you bring, for example, all store managers together, engage them with the tool, that they like it, they see it, they know how to use it, it will help the adoption afterwards. But yeah, in other cases, because we onboarded a lot of our clients during a COVID time, then it was fully digital, and that also worked. But they're the same thing. Communication is key. Explain why you're gonna do this, why you believe it's important for them, and as Erwin was saying earlier, try to find as soon as possible ambassadors that start to bring that message, not from only key management, but from the people themselves that speak about it. And that are, I think, some of the most important things.
Yes, ambassadors. Yeah. The third one is, what are the benefits of exactly having MobieTrain and Speakup combined in in your tool stack. Why should we do it?
I'd say a better employee experience, right? If you imagine a frontline worker
Yeah.
that can have easy access between both solutions without the need for logging in again and different logins, etc. I think that's a benefit, and it's also super clear. Like what I mentioned before, based on data, we see that combined, if you have a seamless connection between the two solutions, drives more engagement, drives more usage because there's more value to get.
Yeah, I can't agree more. I think you see the value of communication on the one hand, informing people about the relevant things and giving them the right knowledge. It's very close to each other. It goes sometimes hand in hand. And of course, if you can bring that from one environment, it has clear benefits to the users. It depends from company to company. If you want to bring it all together, you want to do things separate. But I think if the possibility is there, bringing it as one environment where people can do it is definitely a plus.
Can I give you a final one to conclude? Yeah, to wrap up. Do you have an example of how one of your clients engaged their people during their onboarding and after that?
Guy, do you want to start with this one? I can add.
Yeah, during the onboarding, so you mean specifically how you yeah, work with the onboarding of the client, I guess, huh? Because we have two things. We have, on the one hand, that's what I said earlier already. If you start onboarding a new client and up to the launch, there are different ways. It goes from we had people where they really put a calendar at the place where it would happen, and they see 5 days, 4 days, 3 days, and from there it starts to kick off. So building up that curiosity, start speaking about doing a campaign, and then launch it. Once you launch, there are two things with onboarding. One is how easily can people understand how to work with the tool. That's something that's embedded in our technology. So people, the first time when they enter, they will see on the screen, you need to push exactly here because that's what you're going to do. And we take them with their hands step by step through the tool, so you don't need to do a lot on it. That's all embedded in the software. But then, of course, it's the keep the adoption high and make adoption even better, and that really goes together with what Erwin said also earlier, to look at the data. If you see that certain groups maybe don't adopt that well, yeah, why? First of all, try to understand very clearly which groups, what is behind that, and from there, yeah, do potentially even some interviews and work with that information to make sure that what we said earlier, is it simple enough to them? Is the content relevant to them? Can you change something there? There are a lot of aspects that you will learn from that point.
Yeah, I
And
also
maybe
have an
one more
example.
thing,
Go
yeah,
ahead.
that we from every client that we have, and new practices that we see, and I'm sure Erwin will do the same. Yeah, that we make also videos about that we try to help clients to sync them with other clients, to say like, look, if I look at your case, it's very similar to that one. So basically, this is how you can learn from each other and even bring them together.
Yeah, and then what we've seen as well with a couple customers is if we look at the onboarding of an employee at your company and how can you utilize these type of technologies during that phase, is what we do is we look at, for example, the start date in your HR system or your payroll system, and based on that start date, we can automatically add people to certain groups. So again, if we think about making content relevant, if I'm in onboarding based on my start date, I get specific content aimed for onboarding. And we have quite a lot of customers that do something like that. So it will be super easy to just immediately address everybody that is currently, as of today, in their first 90 days because we have that start date field from the HR system.
Okay, so let's say that we move on now to the closing of the webinar, Guy and Erwin. Yeah. So I would like to close our webinar now by thanking both of you, the speakers, both our marketing teams for the excellent work, and also all of you for being with us today. As a call to action, you're invited to reach out to our teams for a personalized demo experience in which you can really feel how our solutions look like, and then enjoy the rest of the day, the evening, and hope to meet you soon somewhere. Thanks. Bye.